We always like to start with samples, and Jim, you said this is one that people won't see very often, and that's very beautiful.
Yeah, maybe we don't see them that much around here, although they are, this is more of a western species and maybe southern a little bit, but you know that family, Saturniidae, which is the giant silkworm moths, like the Cecropia and the Polyphemus. This is in the same family, and this is called a buck moth, but as you can see, it's a much smaller member of the family. And this is a Nevada buck moth. It feeds on willow, and you'll find it out west, and it only has one generation per season. But it's interesting to see all the coloration that it has on the body of the caterpillar, and you notice that it has these little spines here, and those spines there are urticating hairs, so if I would push my finger up against it, I would feel a burning sensation. And that's, of course, to protect it not so much from people, but from birds and other things like that. And then this is what the adult looks like here on the left side of the screen. And so nocturnal, active at night, and that's one reason why we don't see a lot of it. But if you're out there in the willow bushes along the creek and river bottoms, you just might see some buck moths this time of year.
Lovely. Thank you for bringing that.
You bet.
All right, Rock, yours is garden thug, I do believe.
It's something that can become a garden thug, Kim, and you and I have talked about this. Okay, first I want to show this. This is a rhizome. For those of you that don't have Plant Anatomy 101, but most of you do and understand many things spread by rhizomes, but this is off a tree species, and this is actually off of aspen. Now, everyone loves the quaking aspens, blah, 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 whatever. So you plant them in your yard, and then they are very short-lived, well, relatively short-lived here. They last about, 15 years, 16 years, somewhere in there, and that's how long mine have lasted. And then they get galls, and they get all kinds of other ugly stuff on them, and then they pass away. And when they pass away, you cut them down, which is what you should do, because then they're just going to fall over onto homes and that sort of stuff. So when they do that, though, these rhizomes have unbelievably storage. So this section of rhizome that I'm showing you sprouted all of these aspen sprouts. So you can imagine the expanse of a rhizomatous tree like aspen that's fairly extensive, and then you've got this going all through your yard, and you can travel through my yard, and there's long lines of these roots, right? And it's pretty unsightly. In the lawn, the mowing seems to be taking care of them. I've had to go to triclopure to get them out of the yard. I do want to tell you that it seems to happen mostly when they are in their tail end of their lives, not really in the early stages. So if you really like aspen, don't give up on them. The other thing is if you're on an acreage and you want a really nice place, as they grow, they'll die, and then others will come into their place. And at one time I had about 20 aspen on my site. I'm down to around 5. And, well, wait a minute, I'm sorry. There's about 80 of these in the yard right now. So not so much, but be careful when you plant aspens. They're a beautiful tree. They're great, and actually the world's largest organism is purported to be a grove of aspen in Colorado.
Wow.
There you go. Maybe you'll rival that with Colorado here
I
shortly.
do not want to rival that, and I'm going to use toxic whatever to take care of this. I'm not being IPM tonight because this thing has got me irritated.
All right. Kevin, we have a lot of juniper questions, so good for you to bring one in.
Yeah, a lot of questions about what's been going on with our cedars. Some people in Nebraska think they're a weed. Some people want to keep them around, and for those people who have probably established nice thick shelter belts, they're losing trees, and they're seeing a bunch of tip die back. A lot of it in the past had been because of the drought, but this year, because of the moisture and the temperatures, and because of a lot of the hail events we've been having, we are getting some tip blights, some fungal tip blights. And there are two very common fungal tip blights, Cabotina and Phomopsis. This particular sample happens to be a Cabotina tip blight. They produce similar symptoms to tip blight, so the tips turn brown and die back, and eventually turn kind of an ashen gray, which is kind of the same thing that happens with drought stress. So I guess a long story short is that it's very difficult to diagnose these particular fungal diseases. There are some small, very, very tiny fragments that are left behind by the fungus that we need to use to identify them, and you kind of need a microscope for that. So sending a sample in may help you if you think you do have a tip blight, because both of the symptoms are so alike, and you need to know which one you have, because there's fungicidal programs that'll work for the Phomopsis type tip blights, but not the Cabatinas. So Long story short, if you have what you think is a tip blight, it is good to get it diagnosed if you think that you want to use some kind of a fungicidal spray program. So send it in to get diagnosed. There's some other problems in our cedar shelter belts as well. We're having whole entire trees just die, and unfortunately we haven't really figured out the cause of that yet. Just one or two in an entire shelter belt that are just completely dying, and we will keep you informed if we ever do figure out what's going on, but most likely it's just an environmental stress.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Sarah, a steal from our garden.
Yes, yes, direct from the backyard farmer garden. I brought some coneflowers tonight, and this is a really, it's fun to look at these coneflowers and all the different colorations that are available now for the home gardener. You know, the traditional color for coneflower is a magenta pink, kind of like this one right here. And this is a cultivar called Powwow Wildberry, which was an All-American selection just a few years ago. This is the traditional color, but now we see things like this yellow one. This one is called Cheyenne Spirit. And you can see this is a young flower, and as it gets older, the petals fade to a little bit more of a creamy yellow color. But then the fun thing is that when these things seed themselves out in your garden, and they will seed themselves, you can get a wide range of color variations. So you see these two kind of reddish-orange flowers here. These are seedlings from a Cheyenne Spirit. And the color range for these seedlings went all the way from this kind of orange color to a real red to kind of a red pink. So it's a real mix, and it's really kind of fun to see what happens when a seedling from a hybrid plant like this grows out in your garden. But wonderful plants, great for cutting, a great butterfly plant. So definitely a fun plant to have in your garden.
Thank you, Sarah. And everybody who wants to see them for real, come visit the garden.
Yeah.
All right, Jim, you get the first picture question. This is a viewer who sent us some good pictures, and then you supplemented. She's from Minden. She says about 50% of her chokecherries have what she thinks are midges. She's picking them and solarizing or microwaving before she puts them in the jelly, which we appreciate if we're buying her jelly. But she wants to know if there is something she could actually put on the ground.
Yeah, there is.
Okay, so, and then she's wondering how much and how far, and that's what's in there.
She's well informed about this predicament that she's in. Normally, for chokecherries, you don't see this very much occurring, but it does happen. And as far as the life cycle goes, that's the key for trying to determine treatment for them. But these midges overwinter in the soil, and then sometime in the spring, usually in April, late April-ish, when there's warmer rains and the weather's a little bit warmer, then the adult midges, which look like tiny little gnats, and they'll fly up to the shrub, and then they'll deposit eggs on the developing buds and fruits and that kind of a thing. So it's consequently, you know, once those little eggs hatch and those tiny little midges get established in a fruit, they're going to feed within the fruit, and it's going to accommodate them by enlarging, and then they'll feed on that succulent tissue on the inside. So the key to control is actually putting down a granular insecticide, and I would suggest the bifenthrin because it lasts longer, but you could use permethrin. And you have to be really diligent to be out there to see when this activity of the midge is moving from the ground onto the plants. And my guess is it's probably during flowering or just somewhere following flowering, so that ought to be a good clue there. And then treat that soil with a granular bifenthrin and then water it in pretty well. And I would say if you have an extensive shrubbery or whatever, you know, move well beyond the distance from the shrub, maybe 10, 15 feet or so, because usually when they drop to the ground later on in the season, as well, some of them are probably already dropping now, they almost drop like raindrops directly below. So that way you'll have it covered next year, and hopefully that will reduce it.
Great, thanks, Jim. All right, Rock, you get the next one. This is actually here in Lincoln. This viewer saw this grass in a parking lot over by Parks and Recreation in kind of a bioswale, and they wonder what it is, and would it be a good choice to use kind of between a prairie and a more managed turf?
Really great pictures. This is Blonde Ambition. It's a ornamental blue grama, a selection of blue grama, one of our native perennials. and it's a beautiful grass. And so it would make a great border in a lawn or in a wildflower planting, and you know, it tends to be very uniform, or at least Blonde Ambition does. So it would be a really good choice. In terms of management, that's the beauty of using some of our native species, is that you probably want to cut it back once a year. You can leave the winter foliage, the foliage on through the winter if you want, but it doesn't really stand up to some of our other, some of our other ornamentals. It's a little short in stature, will get crushed by the snow. But still, bottom line is you want to cut it back, trim it up a little bit once a year, minimize the fertility to it, if anything, and probably irrigation is non-existent to never, so you figure out where that is.
All right, thanks, Rock. Kevin, you get 2 potato questions from 2 different viewers. And the first is, these are Yukon Golds, kind of up by Mead. They think they're resistant to mosaic and leaf roll virus, and they're wondering what this is. Is it treatable with what? And then the second one is a potato from St. Paul. Look great and blooming, but they're noticing some rust-colored spots and some completely dead plants, which they have rogued out. And they're wondering if they have early blight, but they've also, of course, had a bit of rain.
A bit of rain, and I'm guessing maybe some hail too, or some damage to the plants. We've been seeing quite a bit of bacterial diseases, actually, and from some of these photos, I see a lot of rot. You see the blackening of the stem on the inside and on the outside. It's kind of gross, but I'd cut into the plant and smell it. There's a Erwinia, or it's now called Pectobacterium type of a bacterium that's ubiquitous out there, and it causes a rot in potatoes and other vegetables, and our row crops too. And you'll smell it. It's nasty. So that's one thing you can do. For the leaf spots, if you're worried about early blight, that particular fungus will create concentric rings. So if you're seeing within that brown lesion on your leaf concentric rings, there's a good indication that it could be early blight, but it's likely just an area of infection from the same kind of bacterium that's causing that rot that you can clearly see on those stems. So the best thing to do is rogue it out. If there is any of that plant material left behind this fall, maybe till it into the soil, because the bacteria can overwinter in the vegetative tissue. So, but not if you incorporate it in the soil.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Sarah, you have some leaf issues also. This is an Omaha viewer, and they actually have several vegetable plants, cuke, squash, beans. Some of the leaves have kind of this yellowish tinge. Now, some of them have dry patches. She does keep her garden watered. Of course, it's Omaha. She doesn't need much help on that right now. But she says the plants are pretty healthy otherwise.
Yeah, and this is just environmental damage. You know, we've had over the last few weeks some days where it's very hot and windy. And so this is windburn that you're seeing on the edges of these leaves. Even well-watered plants can end up with this type of damage on a day when, you know, temperatures are near 80 and we have 30 to 40 mile an hour winds. This kind of thing just happens. I doubt if your plants will be very severely affected by it, and I doubt that you'll really see that advancing very much as long as we don't have any more really hot, windy days. Although, you know, that's kind of not saying much considering that we're moving into July and August. So, but ultimately, it's not a really serious problem for your plants.
Okay, Jim, you have a couple of pictures of cool bugs. The first one, actually, this particular viewer said she rescued this one from a bucket of water.
Good
and
for
then
her.
it crawled up the deck and flew off. She simply wants to know what it was.
Okay, so I can pipe in right now?
You can pipe right in.
Okay, that's called a fiery hunter or caterpillar searcher, names like that. It's actually a ground beetle, and it's one of the largest, most colorful ones we have in Nebraska, and it prefers to crawl up trees and searches for caterpillars, even regulated pest caterpillars, and eats them, so it's a beneficial.
Perfect. And then we have one who also found a large dead bug, and she flipped it over so we could see both sides. She does live in Lincoln. She kind of wonders whether it wants to stay outside or whether it wants one of the spare bedrooms.
Well, I was able to look up some background on this, and this is Dichotomius carolinus, and it's a new record for Lancaster County. Entomologists always like to keep records of what might be spreading across the state. It's a dung beetle, before known only to be in Nemaha County and Richardson County. Now it's in Lancaster County, apparently, so that's good. But anyway, so they like to be out in pasture areas where, you know, cattle leave their dung pats here and there, and they're attracted to that, and the females will burrow underneath that dung pat and deposit her eggs, and her larvae will consume that rich, nutritious substrate there and help to convert everything back to useful humus and soil, right, for something else, for plants. So a good role it plays.
Excellent. Really?
So basically, it's they're feeding on poop.
Yep. They're poop converters.
to cut right through the science.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're feeding on poop.
They're white grub type grubs, just like white grubs.
They're not white if they're feeding on poop.
They're white.
And on that note, Dr. Gassois, your picture is a viewer who has poison ivy halfway up a tree. They cut it, and now they're wondering whether, since they just cut the big stem on it, will it come back anyway and or spread into their landscape and their lawn?
Halfway up the tree is kind of like half a worm in an apple. That's not a good thing. And when you cut the woody species, a thing called apical dominance starts taking over. So it's actually going to branch prolifically from that cut stem. It is going to invade into the landscape. Getting rid of it is problematic. It depends on if you're hypersensitive to poison ivy or not. If you are, then definitely stay away. Some people are not. I can walk through a poison ivy without even get the oil on my skin, but we're not suggesting you do that. But if you do have to go in there, there's some things, there's some products you can put on your skin. We've mentioned them on the show before. They can keep you from getting in. And then you're going to have to pull it back and physically remove it, which is not fun and not easy to do, or consider the use of a product like Ortho's ground ivy control. Either way, it's going to be a task that you're not going to be done with in a single lap, because you're going to be pulling it away. Pieces of the branch will snap off, pieces of the ground parts will snap off, and then you'll have some more in there. So you have to keep on top of it. That was a pretty robust poison ivy in that picture, and it had been there a while. That wasn't just 1 year's growth there, even with the kind of weather we've had. So bottom line is they've got a little bit of a battle in front of them, and they're either going to have to go the chemical route or physically remove it. We don't recommend burning it, and if you burn it, foolishly stick it in a barrel or whatever, don't stand downwind of the smoke, because you will be affected by the oils.
All right, thanks, Rock. All right, Kevin, now you have a couple of tomato questions. 2 different viewers, 2 different spots. The first is this one, kind of a novice. It says 4 are doing pretty well, but 1 is really curling considerably, and the other is starting to curl. They're celebrities. They're obviously in kind of a rock mulch area. They do get some sun. They've sprinkled with some insecticides, 7 in particular. And the second one is a dozen plants that look like this out of 200. This is an organic farmer near Lincoln. So we got 4 in rock and 200 in coffee cans.
All grown outside. Yeah, and it's been difficult. Yeah, it looks like there's a ton of different symptoms going on there. I saw some leaf rolling, which is probably the result of either really high or really low temperatures. Tomatoes will curl their leaves in response to that. There are some viruses that cause that, or some insects. I would look for thrips. I don't suspect viruses at all. The guy with the containers in the 12 out of 200, it wasn't a great picture. It looked like there could have been some bronzing or some kind of lesions on those leaves. I would suggest maybe submitting a sample to see exactly what's going on there, and then from the diagnosis we could make a management recommendation. But I guess it hasn't been easy going this spring for tomatoes. We've noticed. So.
And especially if he's an organic grower, he's going to want to know what that is for you to be able to give him a good recommendation.
Yeah, and if he's organic, he's not going to be able to apply anything. So one of the best things to do is just remove the source of inoculum if it is indeed a fungus.
Are there not any biologicals they can use?
I'm not aware of anything that foliar application that's a kind of a curative / preventative. There might be, I guess. I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
And we've done a bit of looking. All right, Sarah, this is also an Omaha viewer. They have a Snow Fountains Weeping Cherry. North side full sun. They use a systemic for all the creatures that get into our cherries. Has leafed and bloomed beautifully, and this year it did this. Any ideas?
So this is all physiological, most likely. And we're seeing a lot of this type of thing on various other types of plants and landscapes too. It's basically winter damage, possibly some freeze injury that killed some buds this spring too. If you didn't have any flowers, that they probably were killed by freeze injury. So these stems are dead. So just go ahead and trim them back to the point where you have good living tissue and new growth. And there's a very, very good chance that this tree will go ahead and grow out again and could recover and be healthy. I think we've just had a series of bad years here with some very dry conditions and then a very difficult winter for plants. And that's probably why you've had this branch die back. But I think there's a good chance this tree could recover.
This is, let's see, this is an Ida Grove, Iowa viewer. And they have grasshoppers abundant in their garden this year. Besides the hungry chickens, what else will get rid of them?
Well, I would be sure that that you don't completely mow everything in the premises on the property, because if there's grasshoppers in some of these areas where they're waste areas or border edges of the yard or whatever, keep them there because the grasshoppers will remain there. But once you start mowing, then they're going to spread everywhere and they'll get into the garden. That's one thing. But you could treat those areas if you wish, with something like carbaryl or permethrin, while they're still quite small, because they're more susceptible that way. Otherwise, you wait too long and then they're going to be pretty rugged and tough, and they're going to be moving much more easily into the garden setting or ornamental beds or whatever. Good news, I guess, we're making swing back to summers where we're starting to get grasshoppers again. So there is some security in knowing that these cycles do finish out and repeat themselves. But keep at it as much as you can. So that's all I can say. There's no magic cure for grasshoppers.
All right, thank you, Jim. Rock, we have a viewer who had some damage in his potatoes, which doesn't sound like a turf question, but they think that there was Tordon sprayed for thistles in that area.
I'm thinking those potatoes don't look very good.
They don't look good at all. And the question really is, could this neighbor do something else for controlling thistles that would not be so damaging to everything else?
Thistles are real. I mean, if they're physically able, just hacking them off at the taproot does a pretty good job. You see that often with people just hoeing them out, and you got to get all of it. You got to go deep on the tap, and that can work. There's not really anything that you're going to want to spray that will not be damaging to both the potatoes and the thistle. And thistles are difficult to control with herbicides. You do it full scale on big range and acreages, but on small areas like that, I've had them growing in my yard. I hacked them with a hoe, and they were gone, and we were good to go.
All right, so that good old mechanical trick. Okay, Kevin, this is a Murdoch viewer who has bur oaks, some smaller ones, and they're blackish, like somebody tried to spray paint. He noticed it a couple of years ago and thinks it's getting worse, but then they leaf out just fine.
Mm-hmm. So it's the stems or the bark that's
stems
black.
and the bark are kind of black.
Most likely, it's just some kind of a fungus that's living on the kind of the dead material. It's probably actually an alternaria. I would almost bet it. I don't think that it's going to cause any harm to the tree at all. It might be unsightly, but there's really not a lot you can do about it. I wouldn't recommend treating it with any kind of a product or anything like that. It's just something that might come and go each year, but it's not harming the tree. So
Could be a sooty mold too, if there were aphids prior or even this year as well. But of course, sooty molds aren't harmful either.
It could be where the dung beetles were hanging out.
And it could just be the tree wants to look like Halloween, because they do anyway.
The contrast is
All right,
improved.
so just...
as long as the leaves are still looking fine, then it should be okay.
Yeah, okay, good. Sarah, this is a Brainerd viewer who has white spire birch, a couple of years old. The leaves are yellowing and beginning to fall off. And I threw it to you because is that one of the areas where we're seeing way too much rain, or what are you seeing in birches, or questions you're getting?
Yeah, birches can be a little bit sensitive to too much moisture, but also to too little. So you might want to investigate and see, what the root system, what the condition of it has been. If it's been continually soggy and saturated, then that could be why the tree is dropping some leaves. But on the other hand, if it's been dry, that could result in this symptom too. Although it's been a wetter spring, so it might be more likely that it's been a little bit too wet. The other possibility that comes to mind too for me would be, Jim, possibly a borer. If they have some borers attacking this tree, result in some leaf drop.
Right, that's a possibility. It wouldn't be uniform, it would be on certain branches.
Right.
And so in that, usually the appropriate time for treating borers would be in May through June.
All right, Sarah, you ready?
I'm ready.
We have a Nebraska City viewer who wants to know whether it is okay to transplant ferns that are currently on the north side in shade.
No, not the ideal time. It would be better if you could wait till about mid-September to do that.
All right, we have a person who thinks they have a white fruited mulberry in their yard. Is there such a thing?
That does occur sometimes, yeah.
All right. A Benkelman viewer has brand new fruit trees, wants to know how much fruit they will be able to harvest this year.
Brand new, probably not much of anything.
All right. And the same viewer would like to know next year how much thinning should they do?
Thinning, the general rule is 1 fruit per 6 inches of branch, whether it's apples, peaches, apricots, or pear.
Thank you. Will cool, wet weather, like some parts of the state have been having, cause the outer leaves on garlic to yellow?
Could be, but it could be that plants are just reaching their maturity age because garlic is going to be ready to harvest here pretty shortly.
All right. When do viewers thin their iris if they're not blooming very well?
Iris can actually be transplanted right after they're done blooming. So the bearded iris are pretty much done. The Siberian iris will be reaching the end here shortly, and so they can be divided or thinned at that time.
Thank you, Sarah. Nice job. All right, Kevin, no whining. These are not hard questions. Number 1, ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, can foliage from plants that had early blight go in the compost pile?
Early blight? You'd probably get away with it, but I wouldn't. I'd put them somewhere else.
All right. Are you aware of any viruses that attack red buds?
No.
Is propiconazole an all-purpose fungicide, and if so, for what?
You can use that product for a lot of your kind of foliar-based fungi on a lot of your woody ornamentals. For instance, Entomosporium leaf spot on Ornamental Pairs is a good one.
All right. We have a viewer who actually has curling leaves on a celebrity tomato plant that is in a container. Anything to worry about?
I guess we kind of already talked about this, so not really. It's probably a temperature thing or a water, irregular watering.
All right. Is there a fungus that attacks the foliage on English ivy?
They probably get powdery mildew if it's not white and powdery and it's something else. Yeah, possibly. I'm not sure. Send it in. I'll look at it.
All right. Does pruning black knot really get rid of it?
It should. Yeah, if you're sterile and you really get rid of it. But it might come back. It's all over. It's ubiquitous in nature, so it's the spores
You've said
are
that
everywhere.
twice tonight. You're killing me, Kevin.
So you're getting the hang of it, too.
6 and 6,
Say yes
Rock.
and no.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous.
Took it easy on me,
Or
thanks.
7.
Okay, you ready, Rock?
I don't think so. There were 2 people that got 6s. I'm a little nervous.
How long can water stand on turf before you have no turf left?
Depends on species. Buffalo grass has pretty good submersion tolerance. Tall fescue is fair. Bluegrass not as much, primarily because of the reduced root system.
So are we talking weeks, months, or days?
Probably days. Although we had some buffalo grass that stayed wet 10 years ago that was underwater for almost 2 weeks.
All right. We have a viewer who has dog spots showing up in their yard. Are any of the commercial products recommended for getting rid of dog urine spots?
The trouble is most of them have annual ryegrass or other crappy seed in them, and so that's kind of a waste of everyone's time.
All right. We have a viewer who needs to sod around their house. They're wondering how often they're going to have to water that sod.
Until it's rooted, pretty much once or twice a day, just to keep the soil wet. When they sod, make sure that the ground is moist before they put the sod down.
All right. Seems like baby dandelions are coming up all over the place now instead of fall. Is that unusual?
No, because they germinate this time of year, and then they after flowering, and there's some seed resident in the soil. So, no, I'm not surprised to see them in their preponderance this time of year, Kevin.
Excellent. Nice job. You ready?
Yes, okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Have you ever heard of using a Clorox and water mix to get rid of chiggers in the landscape?
No, because it's probably deadly to the turf grass.
Okay. Will elm leaf flea beetle attack other members of the elm family like Zelkova?
Yeah, Japanese Zelkova most likely. Siberian, it seems to be the most preferred, however.
Is there anything you can do about it?
Not with large trees, but early on, carbaryl, if you can cover a tree, it would be great to eliminate them.
Okay, we have a viewer seeing little worms on their honey locust. Is that, what might that be?
There's a honey locust, a webworm type of worm that binds the masses, the leaves together. It has 2 generations. It's likely that in its early stages.
Okay, are spider mites attacking the butterfly bushes yet?
I haven't noticed lately, so most likely they'll be hitting those cherry tomatoes that are in the backyard farmer garden.
Oh, great. We have a viewer who wonders whether spiders are making the little holes in the hostas, and if so, should they kill the spiders?
No, spiders do not make holes like that, so it has to be something like a small beetle, but my guess is they're probably slugs or snails.
Nice job, all.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
Could I follow up on the dog question?
Sure.
So we've talked about this on the show multiple times, and I didn't want to be too flippant about it, but I was, so I apologize for that. But that said, you know, if you have an area that's been frequented by dogs, there's a dog run is a better idea. Rotating the dog in and off the property is another idea, because they tend to concentrate in one area, especially females. Female dogs have far more caustic urine than males. Plus, males tend to go up against the side of a tree or a branch or a fence, right? Or a bush or a fence, so they don't tend to concentrate in the lawn as much. Some vets will prescribe, and I know some people are adverse to this, a pill that'll lower or modify the caustic nature of the urine in a dog, and you can talk to your veterinary vet about that. The other thing is there's diets. In some of the organic sites, you can see that there's a diet you can feed your dogs, which will also reduce the caustic nature of dog urine. But there's a certain irony there, because most organic people aren't real big turf fans, so I get a kick out of that.
Okay, thanks, Rock. All right, what has Gladys put together for us today, Sarah?
Gladys brought us 3 beautiful flowers today. So the bounty. The first flower here, these yellow flowers in the center, this is a centaurea, or a knapweed. This one is called Centaurea macrocephalia, and so it's giant knapweed is what it is. Not native to the U.S., it comes from Turkey. This gets about 5 feet tall or so, likes full sun, and it likes an area where you can have some moist soil. And so that would be a great one for the garden. Then the plants here in the front with the red flowers, this is bee balm, or Monarda. And Monarda is not native in Nebraska, but it is native in North America. And it's a perennial. It's a kind of a clump-forming plant. It will gradually spread itself through your garden. A great one for bees or butterflies. There is a cultivar that's red like this called Jacob Klein, which is one of the best of the reds, because it has great color and you get very little powdery mildew on the foliage. Powdery mildew is one of the big pests that we see on bee balm or Monarda. So that's a great plant. Then the one that she has in the back here, this is a verbascum, or a mullen, sometimes they're called. Most of the verbascums have yellow flowers, but obviously this one is a pretty white flower, and you get these tall spikes with the beautiful white flowers. These get about 3 feet tall or so. Gladys said they can be a little bit invasive in the garden, so you need to be careful with them and not let them spread around too much. And so that's what we have from Gladys today. And I will just add, Kim, too, that Gladys said she harvested her first tomatoes today, too.
Oh,
2
boy.
little sun gold cherry tomatoes. So
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, as always, to Gladys for bringing those in. All right, Jim, you get the next picture. It is an 8 to 10-year-old weeping white pine. Has white dust. It's a nice pine, and but it's got this dust on the trunk. Comes off. It's not slimy. Doesn't see any sap. Any ideas on what it is and what you do about it?
There's an aphid-like insect called a pine bark Adelgid, and that's because it doesn't have those little tail pipes on the end of it, so they classified it entirely different than aphids. But the same habit, it's a piercing, sucking insect, and it tends to reside on the bark of the trunk and branches and feeds, believe it or not, through that layer of bark on the tree. So ultimately, if it's really heavy, it can be detrimental. But in most cases, it's considered a moderate pest. And so I would suggest that you just take the blast or nozzle on the garden hose or whatever and just dislodge them on a regular basis. If you want to add a little bit of soapy solution to it as well, that would come in handy too. They tend to be also in the summertime, they'll be up in the needles as well. And so that might be a little bit more difficult to get to them, but most of the time you'll find them especially in the autumn and then through the season on the trunk. So that ought to make the work easy. You don't have to eliminate them all entirely, but cut their numbers down so that then the tree itself will continue to be healthy.
Thank you, Jim. All right, Rock. A weed is in a mixed perennial bed and along the sidewalks and kind of into the turf, and they're wondering what is it and how to control it.
Yeah, this one was a little bit hard to identify, but it's actually Pennsylvania smartweed. You see that characteristic patch on the leaf and the long lanceolate leaf type. And surprisingly, it can get 10 centimeters high, or about 2.5 inches, or as tall as 3 meters, or excuse me, 2 meters, which is almost 6 feet. So there's a lot of variability on it. That's why I took a little more time to identify it. Bottom line is it's annual. This time of year, at this point in time, there's probably not a whole lot you can do, especially in the landscape bed, except for hand roguing. Get it out of there. It should pull up relatively easy. If that doesn't work, if you don't get it all up this year, you may want to consider some of the preen type products. Remember to apply them multiple times to get effective control.
Excellent, thank you. Our very first zucchini question, Kevin. A viewer that has one healthy and at least one failing, and then I think the close-up view on the failure is potentially even worse. Yeah, down in there.
Yeah, that looks like there could be a little bit of rot. Again, this could be one of those things where you got some hail damage, if that's likely in your area. That could be what it is. It could be a vascular rot that eventually takes the plant, or it could be just isolated to the areas of injury. The other thing, too, is that we were all really excited to get our plants in the ground this spring, and our soils actually took a long time to warm up. So they were nice and cool, which is really, really ideal for Pythium, root rotting type of fungi. And I can say in the clinic that I've seen quite a bit of those associated with some sickly looking roots. So it is possible that that's something you have going on. If you're thinking about putting the same kind of plants in that area next year, I'd maybe flag that area and don't do that, put them somewhere else. Otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily rogue it out at this point. It might kick out of that.
All right, thanks,
Still time
Kevin.
to plant, isn't there?
You could, especially for a short crop like zucchini or summer squash.
Excellent. All right, Sarah, you have a question from a Blair viewer. They had a rose that came out of nowhere after they had a silver maple cut down, taking over. Seems like it wants to climb.
Yeah, this is Multiflora Rose, which is, it's not considered an invasive or a noxious weed in Nebraska, but it is a very invasive plant. So it's really not one that you want to keep. Multiflora Rose has those single petaled white flowers, and if you look really closely at the stems, you'll see that the thorns curve down. If you have an upright stem, the thorns curve down or backward on the stem. And so you're going to want to cut this out. You know, if you want to do it organically, you could just dig the plant out and get rid of it that way. Otherwise, you could cut it down and do maybe a stump treatment with some Roundup on the cut stumps, or a stump treatment of triclopyr, something along that line. They spread through wooded areas through the fruits, which the little berries, the little rose hips are eaten by birds and various other mammals and will spread them all over. So you probably want to get rid of it before it really spreads too much and becomes a problem.
You have a picture, number 4. This is a viewer that found this insect on a corn leaf and wonders what it is.
Well, that's exciting. That's two Midas flies that are mating. Midas flies mimic wasps, but they're completely harmless. Little is known about their life cycle. It is believed that the larvae feed within rotted wood, and the Midas flies themselves are just harmless. Enjoy them. They're fairly large for flies.
Excellent. A weed everywhere in the landscape, Rock, and now they're seeing it in the turf. Is it annual, perennial, and what will eliminate it?
This is an annual. It's everywhere because it's a dayflower, prolific cedar. It is very difficult to control. It's a monocut, so they got to make sure they understand that the 2,4-D type products would be a no-no, especially at this temperature anyway. Their best bet is to hand weed and then consider a preen type product next spring.
And it's related to spider warts, so those flowers last a day.
A day, exactly.
Dayflower.
Dayflower, go figure out.
Okay, Kevin, we have a question about ornamental pears with fungal spots on the foliage. We've had a couple of these this season, and this particular person wanted to know what this was, and would propiconazole be the fungicide of choice?
Yeah, it could be. That looks like maybe the beginnings of that entomosporium leaf spot that we talk about. It looks like it's bumpy. I'd like to see the other side of the leaf, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. A propoconazole type product or chlorothalonil type product will work for treatment. You're kind of trying to protect the leaf buds as they emerge, so it's an early spring application type of a thing. We're well beyond anything that you can do about it now. Just increase the spacing. If you're in a nursery, space out your plants. If it's already planted in the ground, maybe do some pruning to help increase airflow. Get rid of the leaves when they fall to the ground.
Okay, so the sanitation is the big deal.
Sanitation, yes.
Okay, can they go in the compost pile?
I'm not sure about that fungus, if it could escape or if the other microbes would eat it. I don't know.
Okay, that might be a lightning round for you next time. All right, Sarah, we have a North Platte viewer who has a weeping willow trying to recover. A big one, split about 2 years ago. Bolts were drilled to hold it together. Curious about the health and about the weeping, oozing stuff with small insects and everything else going on. So,
You know, I'm not too concerned about the weeping and oozing. That's just probably sap coming out from various damaged areas in the bark. But in that second picture, you could see something which I think is a lot more serious. There's some cracked sections of the bark that are fairly big around that bolted area, and I think that tree has a pretty large canker and a large section of dead bark right beneath where the bolt was installed. Now, I don't know that installing the bolt caused the bark to die. It could have been there already, but that's a pretty serious thing for the health of this tree. And given the fact that it's already split and it has a pretty significant canker, I don't know if I would put a whole lot of time and effort into this tree. Bolts like that are questionable in the long-term usage because they're not going to be strong enough to hold that tree as it gets bigger and bigger. The tree will eventually fail at that site. I would cut my losses with this tree and take it down.
all right, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that trying to hold together something that no longer will do it is
Right. It just doesn't work, not in the long term.
right. So we have about 10 seconds panel, and I think the question for all of you is it time to water or no for anything that you do? Yes, no, or maybe? Sarah says no.
Hold off for now if you're living in southeast Nebraska.
I have not started up my irrigation system in eastern Nebraska yet.
I'd say no as well.
So there we go. Everybody who doesn't have a timer on their irrigation system, go out and turn the darn thing off. We'll see what happens over the weekend. I'm afraid we're supposed to get some severe storms again.